All right, welcome everyone. Let's think of this as a strategic workshop. Today, we're not just looking back at history, we're going to break down a real-world success story in diplomacy. It's a fascinating case that gives us a powerful, and I mean repeatable, blueprint for peace, something that could be applied to some of the toughest conflicts we're facing right now. Ready? Let's dive in. So we have to start with our first case study, what I call the flawed blueprint. This is really a cautionary tale. It's about how a single line, just drawn arbitrarily in the sand by an outside power, can spark a century of conflict. This is the model of exactly what not to do. And this quote from H.R.P. Dixon, a British official who was actually in the room, it just says it all, doesn't it? You can feel the resentment right there in the words. This wasn't a negotiation. It was one guy making a snap decision that created a grievance so deep, it would fuel tension in the region for decades to come. And here you can see the results of that decision. This map, it shows the outcome of the 1922 Uqair Conference. The British High Commissioner, a man named Sir Percy Cox, literally took a red pencil to a map of Arabia, mainly to please the powerful Ibn Saud, and in doing that, he created this neutral zone. You can see it right there, that hatched area. This had nothing to do with tribal realities or history or anything on the ground. It was a complete political invention, and it absolutely planted the seeds for future conflict, even playing a role in the grievances that led to the 1990 Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. So, okay, let's officially give this a name. We'll call it Blueprint A, the colonial model. What are its key features? Well, they're pretty clear. Rigid lines, imposed by outsiders, and a total disregard for local context. And the outcome, as we've seen over and over again, is that these arbitrary borders basically become ticking time bombs, creating what seem like irresolvable tensions over resources and sovereignty. But here's where it gets really interesting. The failure of that rigid model, it actually led to something much smarter, much more successful. And the critical difference? It wasn't designed by outsiders. No, it came from the regional powers themselves. This is where we get to the modern success story. A blueprint that actually works. And on this slide, you can see that critical evolution right there. The old neutral zone was just a constant headache. It was a source of endless problems. So in 1965, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia did something truly brilliant. They replaced it with what they called the divided zone. They drew a clear line for political sovereignty, so no more arguments about whose land is whose. But, and this is the genius part, they agreed to keep all the valuable oil resources underneath that land as a shared asset. They very cleverly separated the politics from the economics. And these two images just illustrate the transformation perfectly. On the left, you've got the messy, vague legacy of 1922, and then on the right, you see the elegant, locally owned solution from 1965. You can literally see the journey from an imposed problem to a collaborative solution as that confusing hatched area becomes a clearly defined partition zone. So let's really break down this new model, our Blueprint B. It's built on three key pillars. First, you have a solid, undeniable physical border that takes care of the all-important need for sovereignty. Second, you create a fluid economic border where resources and all the profits from them are shared equally. And third, and this might just be the most critical piece of the puzzle, the solution is owned and driven by the local powers themselves. So, how does this actually work in practice? I mean, what are the diplomatic tools that allow this model to function, not just on paper, but when it's under intense pressure? Let's get into the mechanics. Okay, the core diplomatic tool here is this really fascinating concept called constructive ambiguity. Now, that doesn't mean you're just ignoring the problem. No, it's a very clever technique. You intentionally use language that allows both sides to interpret it just a little bit differently. So, for example, an agreement might not specify the exact historical origin of a border claim. This allows both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to stick to their national narratives while still agreeing on the practical reality of where the line is today. It lets everybody save face and focus on what really matters, cooperation. You know, to make this super simple, think about two neighbors. They decide to build a clear, strong fence between their properties. There's zero question whose yard is whose. That's your sovereignty. But a valuable fruit tree happens to be growing right on the property line. Now, instead of fighting over who owns the tree, they just agree to share all the fruit, no matter which side of the fence it falls on. You see? The fence is rigid, the ownership of the fruits is fluid and shared. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when you put the two models side by side. The colonial model, imposed by outsiders, using rigid lines. And what did it lead to? Conflict. the co-management model, designed by local actors, using flexible resource sharing. And the result? Stability. The outcomes just couldn't be more different. That's the core lesson right there. But of course, no model is truly tested until it comes under extreme pressure. And between 2009 and 2019, this one faced its ultimate trial by fire, a multi-billion-dollar crisis that pushed it right to the breaking point. So this huge crisis kicked off in 2009 over an oil concession dispute. Things just escalated from there, and by 2014, the offshore Hafshi field was completely shut down. A year later, the whole zone went dark. I mean, can you imagine that? For nearly 5 years, not a single barrel of oil came out of the ground. This was a massive, high-stakes standoff, and it took until 2019 to finally get it resolved. And the economic damage, it was just staggering. We are talking about an opportunity cost, oil that just sat in the ground, benefiting no one, of more than $20 billion. So this wasn't just some regional squabble. It had huge global implications. So how did they finally fix it? They went back to their own blueprint. The 2019 agreement was a true landmark. Saudi Arabia formally recognized the dividing line as a sovereign international border, a huge validation of Kuwait's position, something they'd wanted for a long, long time. In return, compromises were made to get the oil flowing again. The key takeaway here? The model bent, but it didn't break. It proved it could actually handle a major crisis. So, what can we take away from all this? This isn't just a history lesson. It is a practical, replicable model for modern diplomacy. It's something we can actually use. So if we were to put this into a practical toolkit for diplomats, what would it look like? Well, here are the 4 key steps we've uncovered. Step 1, formally separate the politics from the economics. Define the fence, your sovereign border. Step 2, agree to share the resources equally. That's the fruit from the tree. Step 3, and this is so crucial for long-term success, create technical working teams, people on the ground, not just politicians, to handle the day-to-day operations and stop disputes before they even start. And finally, step 4, use that clever tool of constructive ambiguity to get past those historical arguments you know you're never going to solve. Now, this model provides a really powerful template for other conflicts. You could apply it to the highly contentious, unresolved maritime boundary between Kuwait and Iran, or to other resource disputes all across the Gulf, and really anywhere in the world. And hey, it's not just us saying this. Policy experts who have really studied this, people like Bader Al-Saif at the Carnegie Endowment, they absolutely agree. They see this as an innovative model for peace that really should be showcased on a global stage. So, I'll just leave you with this one provocative question. We started with a red pencil that drew lines of conflict. We've ended with a blueprint for cooperation. So the challenge for all of us, for the next generation of diplomats, is to consider, can this model, this fundamental shift from rigid lines to flexible solutions, be used to redraw the future of resource conflicts all around the world?